You guys, guess what? Dr. Bob doesn't know that I'm doing this, but today is a special day. It's his birthday, and not just any birthday. It's his 50th birthday today, March 14th. And so from everyone at the Vaccine Conversation, all of our listeners, all of the supporters, and all of his patients, we want to take time to wish you a very happy birthday.
On behalf of fathers everywhere, thank you, Dr. Bob, for everything you've done and everything you continue to do for families and children.
Thank you for listening to us as parents, getting to know our children and our families, and continuing to advocate for and educate all of us.
As a medical professional who supports informed choice, thank you for speaking out and giving our healthcare practitioners the courage to also tell the truth and advocate for our patients.
Thanks, Dr. Bob, for putting your reputation on the line and believing in this cause, even though it has forced you to sacrifice so much as a result.
Hi, Dr. Bob. I'd just like to express my deepest appreciation and give you all my thanks for all the work that you've been doing for children and for the medical freedom movement and for fostering the idea of informed consent. You are a hero to so many of us.
Thank you, Dr. Bob, for helping and protecting kids like me. Thank you, Dr. Bob. Happy birthday!
When you open the door for somebody else.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob. We have just been covering so many topics. There's so much going on right now. It is hard to keep up and have a regular life. It's too bad this couldn't be my full-time job. Yet I'm a stay-at-home mom.
Well, you could full-time make no money doing podcasting instead of just part-time.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
No, what I'm doing is I'm part-timing it with my other full-time gig, which is being a stay-at-home mom. But you know what I want to do? We're going to talk about the Senate hearing that just happened on Tuesday, March 5th, 2019. But before we do that, I want to talk about this bill in Washington that has now passed the House and is on to the Senate. This is HB 1638. A lot of people have been calling this, like the 277 bill, but it's really not. And I want to distinguish the difference. Apparently, there is another bill in Washington that is going to be for all things, but this particular bill is only removing exemptions for the MMR vaccine. And this is as a direct result of their, quote unquote outbreak, which is still only as of today exactly at 71 cases, which still, Disneyland was 131 cases. This is really not nearly as numerous as that. But Washington did declare a state of emergency after 25 or 26 cases, which does lead you to perhaps use critical thinking skills and wonder if that was all as part of the foundation for building this legislative season. And, it helps to pass a bill, I'd say, if you had to declare a state of emergency, wouldn't you? They even mentioned the Washington outbreak in the Senate hearing. But anyway, what I want to mention to you is the amendments that were added to this and when it passed. And another thing I want to acknowledge is this passed 57-40. This was not, that's not a huge landslide. You would expect something like this. Again, this is only for removing the religious and philosophical exemptions for one vaccine, which covers 3 diseases, but one vaccine, which means philosophical exemptions and religious exemptions would still be intact for the other ones. However, you'd think that something like this amid the crisis of the public health outbreak would be a no-brainer, right? Like, how come there are 40 dissenters? Who were the legislators? 40 legislators did not feel, after hearing all the evidence, that this was a good idea. And so that's something to pay attention to, because this was not a completely one-sided passed thing.
Right. And I think that's very telling. If we are eventually going to have mandatory vaccination laws in every single state nationwide, we know the California one barely passed. And if these laws barely pass in every state, you're going to have a lot of pissed off constituents and legislators who are saying we are now mandating medicine and barely half of us thought it was a good idea. We're really going to mandate invasive medicine to all children when almost half the country disagrees with that.
Well, and I thought this was interesting because with 277, the Senate hearing was like almost unanimous. That was it flew so quickly through the process. They fast-tracked the bill. By the time it got to the Assembly, we had a chance to talk to legislators and put together some arguments, and then it barely passed. So we actually made so much headway. So this is already at that place where not everybody's on board, and this is just with one vaccine and just in the first house. We had seen unanimous voting in the first house, almost unanimous in the first house, and then it got to be a little more muddled. Now it's already a little bit muddled already for Washington in their first house. And I saw this poll that C-SPAN did recently about did you see that?
Cool,
so it closed, and it was 59%, so almost 60% said out of 180,000 votes said that vaccines should not be mandatory.
Yeah, 59% said
so 60%
no.
of these Americans, so that's something to pay attention to. But I just wanted to update you. So the bill 1638 passed the House on the way to the Senate. It was not a landslide vote, and it is only for the MMR vaccine. The other exemptions will stay intact for this particular bill. There are other bills, but I thought it was interesting that the legislators were not unanimous on this, even in the state where there is the outbreak happening. And I actually thought it was so genius that they even had a bill that was tailor fit for the disease that they were talking about. Instead of 277 has the Disneyland outbreak with more than half are adults and about half were vaccinated. And that outbreak led to the mandating and removal of exemptions for 10 different diseases. Right. And they did not tailor pick it to MMR. They did not try to make this all about that particular public health crisis. They made this a universal project. And that's something I thought that was interesting when I looked at the Washington state.
Yeah, and we heard a couple weeks ago that a similar bill in Washington died. There, I guess there was a bill that was mandating MMR, measles vaccine for everybody in Washington, and that bill died.
There were several all at the same time.
And I didn't even know there was a second version of pretty much the same bill. So this one, we all celebrated when we heard that died, but apparently there's another one that's kind of the same thing, and it's going through so far. So the fight isn't over.
Speaking of the Washington outbreak, I did a truth post on.
I pulled it up.
Oh, you did? I don't know if was it a truth post? No.
No, it's not a truth post.
It's just a post.
But
I basically dissected the outbreak information because when I looked at the statistics of the age breakdown, and I realized that there were no infants under 1, and there were who caught measles out of the outbreak cases. And at that time, I think there were 59 cases at that time, or 61, 59, 61. And there were also only 2 adults. So was
3 cases.
Well, they changed it to 3, because by the time I wrote the post and the next day there were 2 more cases. So that's why I had to adjust it. But think about that. In all of the outbreaks that we've had in the United States, and we can do a separate post on that because I want to break down each of the outbreaks. You never see no babies under 1. Never. I have not seen one in all of the outbreaks I've ever studied, even in completely unvaccinated communities. You never, like the Amish, never see no babies under 1. And to have this many people and not a single infant led me to only one conclusion, that the parents had natural immunity from the wild infection and the mothers were able to pass that immunity on to their babies. Why is this so important? Because babies are the ones that are at high risk for complications as well as adults. And these were the 2 groups that were completely protected. And the people that were getting it were age-appropriate cases where you have the least chance of complications happening. So while they used this outbreak to really push legislation to prove why we need more mandates, you're looking at a group of people who opted out conscientiously on purpose, and the parents all had natural immunity. The babies were protected. The adults were protected, and there was one hospitalization out of all of 60 cases.
Right, one hospitalization.
The lowest hospitalization rate that we've seen, and no babies. This particular model demonstrates exactly what natural immunity looks like when there is an outbreak in the United States. And we have not seen anything like this in all of the documented outbreaks that I've seen over the last 40 years in the United States.
Right, yeah. So if you want to look at more of this information is from February 17 on Melissa's Facebook, and it's a great meme or infographic that you did.
And I added it to our immunity education group blog also on the website, so you can come view it there. But I just wanted to give you that update on Washington. The information on that outbreak, I think, is crucial to understand too.
Yeah, it's so ironic that it's almost like one of the only outbreaks in recent years that was like a textbook standard what you'd expect measles to behave like in a very benign, harmless fashion,
right,
to a community of Russians and other religious families who basically had decided to opt out of that vaccine. So they knew they might catch this disease. All their healthy kids caught the disease, one hospitalization instead of, we would have expeced like 12 hospitalizations.
And the hospitalization was an adult.
It was
only an overnight stay.
Yeah, no young babies caught it. No immunocompromised people.
No children were hospitalized,
and no older adults either. No elderly. Wasn't it all like the 3 adults that caught it were kind of younger adults?
I didn't get the age breakdown of the adults.
I feel like you told me that, but I mean, my point being, a totally kind of harmless textbook situation where you'd almost would expect measles to kind of go around that kind of a community. No one was harmed, and all these families kind of had purposely opted out of the vaccine. Why is that a national emergency? Why is that turned into a state of emergency in Washington, and why is that spearheading this national measles crisis? When again there's been no harm done.
The least harmful outbreak of anyone that we've had in 40 years.
All the babies, and no babies even caught it, like Melissa said. So again, the reason is there is a media agenda. There is an agenda here that is specifically agenda. Specifically designed to basically turn into what today's what today's topic is, which is the Senate hearings.
And this is going to be probably a part 2.
Yeah, we're going to probably have to do a number of these as it plays out.
The rest of the people that spoke at this hearing, we're just going to cover the intro statements of the first 2 senators that are presenting this, and we will cover the public statement, the statements from the public, which, by the way, were only one side. There were only one side of information here. There was nobody presenting information on that panel that would have said, hey, there's something, here are our concerns. This is why this won't work, or this is why it's not a good idea. They invited 5 people to speak that reinforced their idea of why mandatory vaccination should be a federal policy instead of a state-based policy.
Right. And I mean, this is like totally like a bad movie. I mean, the government wants to do something, wants to take away the rights of citizens, and so it's like a show they put on. And how many movies have we seen this where we're screaming at the screen, how staged this is? Totally staged, totally put on, just like a circus. Again, I mean, why do they even bother doing this? Like, they didn't even need to do this. I mean, if these committees want to have some sort of legislative process where they're going to insist that we mandate vaccines, why even put on a show? I almost think like they would have had a lot more credibility had they put on a balanced debate, a balanced presentation, invite 2 people from the pro-mandate and 2 people from the anti-mandate side, and have a real hearing. You'd think that's what a legitimate government would have done.
Honest, open communication.
Right.
That should
and
be
instead
the goal.
they just had. It's like having a trial with only
side.
A prosecution.
Isn't that crazy?
And no defense.
I kept looking like, where are the other people?
I mean,
that
who
get
are
to
they
speak?
fooling? I mean, it almost makes them look worse than had they done nothing.
I mean, we're all citizens. Like, shouldn't everybody get a chance to voice their opinion? And let's not even talk about the fact that there was a high schooler on the panel who has zero expertise.
Yeah.
Why would he be given a spot compared to a doctor that wanted to raise legitimate concerns on this policy?
Yeah. So I think what we want to do is maybe just I'm going
to start with him.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Just kind of address the misinformation.
We're going to fact check.
Yeah. We're going to fact check the 2 senators' opening statements.
Their opening statements, yes. Yeah. And I will say, so we're starting with Senator Alexander. I will say, again, legislators are not experts on vaccines. They're not experts on vaccine injury. They're not experts on infectious diseases. They both were reading papers, prepared statements that were crafted for them to say and hit all of the bullet points, which they did. And both of these senators said a lot of the same things. But I just first want to start off by saying that Senator Alexander pronounced pertussis. And I just want to say, just that alone should tell you how much he knows about whooping cough and these outbreaks and what needs to be done and what should be mandated. I mean, there were 2 diseases that he did not actually pronounce correctly, which I just thought was interesting considering he's the one bringing this to the table. Anyway, it says... So he starts off talking about polio, and that's kind of like what you hear. You know, a lot of these congressmen are older. You do tend to see them talk. In fact, in 277, they did that too, I think. And we're going to have some very interesting conversation on polio coming up, discussing some books. We talked about it with Dr. Tom Cowan, and some different theories on polio. The idea that maybe the virus itself was harmless and in the intestines of children and adults for hundreds of years even, and it wasn't until it was combined with environmental toxins that it turned dangerous. And I want people to know the difference between poliovirus and poliomyelitis are 2 separate things. The poliovirus was not always responsible for causing paralysis. In fact, it was about 1% or less than 1%.
Yeah. 99% of people who have poliovirus in their intestinal system, it's completely harmless.
Right. And this is according to the World Health Organization. But
you have to start out with polio as the classic example of why vaccines are so wonderful. And then it's a very, carefully crafted media approach. It's planned that way because that's the classic example.
Totally.
Everyone believes, they think it's infallible. You can't argue against it.
He mentioned iron lung. I mean, come on.
Right.
And not just Tom Cowan, Dr. Tom Cowan, but we are also going to talk with the author of a book coming up soon called The Moth and the Iron Lung that talks all about polio, again, talking about these theories. So I say that to you now because you're going to not want to miss that. Because if what these other theories are saying is true, this whole argument gets totally blown out of the water. And that's something to pay attention to. But anyway, he actually talks about the hearing that they had 4 years ago. They had this hearing on federal mandates 4 years ago, and that was also following a measles outbreak, and it was the Disneyland outbreak. And he says it was the worst outbreak since the disease was declared eliminated in 2000. And just the irony is the Disneyland outbreak, was, like I said, mostly at least half were vaccinated and most were adults. So I just find the details of the outbreak incredibly important when we talk about whether or not it's worth mandating something.
Right. And since we're fact checking, we just have to point out that measles was never eliminated. In the year 2000, when Senator Alexander says it was eliminated, we had 86 cases in the United States. And you can find that on the CDC, if you dig really deeply in the CDC website. That's because an eliminated disease is one that we've virtually eradicated from the country, and it's no longer continuously spreading. And by that definition, measles is still considered eliminated in the United States because it's not continuously spreading everywhere. It just occurs in outbreaks. So it's still eliminated, but he's making it look like
it's coming back.
Like it was 100% eliminated with 0 cases, and now it's back. And again, that is not factual.
And so he says, even though 91% of Americans were vaccinated for measles in 2017, according to the CDC, we continue to see outbreaks of this preventable disease because of pockets of low vaccination rates. Let's point out where this is wrong. One, we are not seeing outbreaks because of pockets of unvaccinated or low vaccination rates.
We sometimes are. In that, I mean, honestly, the Washington outbreak is in a low vaccinated community,
but not one that affects the public.
You're right. You're
not like
right.
a publicly
it's
spread
isolated.
outbreak.
You're right. It's isolated in that area.
They're okay with getting it.
Right.
So
you're right. They signed up for it. You're right on that count, and that it's not spreading. But we do see outbreaks in low vaccinated or unvaccinated areas, but not so much.
Also, though, not only.
Right. But I think the point being is the reason why it then will spread other places. such as with Disneyland, is largely because adults are not immune. It's because the herd of adults, there's no herd immunity for measles in our adult population because the vaccines have worn off. That's why we see it spread. That's why we see it sometimes start, and that's why we see it spread like state to state. It's because it for a large part is the vaccinated adults where their vaccines have worn off. So we see both things. We see small, isolated, local outbreaks in unvaccinated children, but then we also see spread largely because the vaccines have worn off and all the adults are susceptible.
But even the unvaccinated communities are rare because, like the Amish community, that's one. There are so few of those communities with enough people that are unvaccinated in one place like that. These religious communities are very rare across the country. That's not the reason for outbreaks.
You're right, because all those outbreaks, they're all isolated to those areas. The religious groups in Texas from several years ago was a very isolated outbreak. The Amish in Ohio, some years before that. The Jewish community in New York. These outbreaks are isolated to those areas.
They come from international exposure, international travel, come back to a group that are consciously unvaccinated.
But the point being, it's not spreading around the United States much outside those groups. And when it does, it's often because the adult community does not have herd immunity because they never got natural immunity from the infection as kids. And we're relying on vaccine, artificially induced immunity that wears off.
But also the Disneyland outbreak was not started by a group of religious unvaccinated people either. So that's a huge outbreak that was very
Hardly
publicized.
Adults. Yeah, and over half the cases were adults.
Yeah, and half were vaccinated. So that's a perfect example of something that was not because of a pocket of low vaccination rates. Outbreaks are happening because of vaccine failure as well. And that's something to pay attention to. It's not like it's, 91%. I mean, gosh, to get 91% to do anything in a population with so many people is already amazing. To think that that's just not enough and it needs to be more. And then to blame those people on the reason why we have measles. It's not why we have measles. And the people that got measles in Washington were okay with getting measles, which is why their parents already had measles. And anyway, so I just want to fact check the idea that outbreaks of preventable disease are not happening because there are people using exemptions. Like, I just want to understand it is not that simple. And then this language he uses, vaccines have been so successful that until recently, Americans have lived without fear of getting measles, polio, or rubella. So what he's telling us, now we have to fear that. We have to fear measles, polio, and rubella. And that's just not true. That's just not true.
There's no fear of polio. We haven't had polio in the United States in about 40 years now. 40 years ago was the last time we had a natural, wild, occurring case of polio. Any other cases that we've seen a little bit here and there since then have been caused by the vaccine, the live vaccine.
And of course, in the early 90s, we had outbreaks of measles for 3 years that was a very, very large, 18,000, 20,000 cases in 1989, 1990, 1991. So he tries to say, until recently, we've lived without the fear of getting measles. There have been measles every year, and some years, thousands of cases. In the 90s,
the point being measles is not increasing.
It's not increasing, and it was never gone, like you said. It's not like all of a sudden we didn't have to worry about it, and now we do. It's still very, very low. And we
don't have to worry about rubella, because rubella is not on the increase. Rubella has been eliminated from the United States as well. So again, he kind of has to use examples. But he's wrong in that people do not fear polio or rubella. Or they do not have to live in fear of either of those. But again, I think he has to spice it up.
Of course he does.
In order to make a point.
And then he goes on to talk about herd immunity. We need herd immunity. Now, I recently wrote a post on herd immunity and how it does not apply to vaccines and the history of herd immunity and what it means and the adults that with primary and secondary failure.
Yeah, and we have a whole episode on that. If you haven't listened to that, definitely go back and listen to our herd immunity episode because we really break it down thoroughly there.
So he brings that saying that there are people that are too young to get the vaccine, people that are immunocompromised can't get the vaccine, and vaccines protect. Again, vaccines only work if everyone gets them. That's what he's saying. And he says the overall vaccination rate nationwide is high enough to create herd immunity. He says that. While the overall vaccination rate nationwide is high enough to create this herd immunity, certain areas, the pockets where the vaccination rates are low, are vulnerable to outbreaks. I want to reinforce to people who don't know the numbers that when we're talking about unvaccinated, we're talking about 1% of the nation is completely unvaccinated, according to the NIS, which is the National Immunization Survey given by the CDC. 1%. So if herd immunity threshold is 95, hypothetically, 1% is still not getting close to that. We know there are less than 1% of immunocompromised individuals. So then let's just say that's 2% total. We're still 3% ahead of the curve from what we need. So this information and this kind of data is not accurate, and it's important that when you're hearing something, you'll know how to kind of go through it and see that. But basically, he's saying, yes, we have these high rates because we do have high rates. And these are high rates without removing exemptions. And he's still saying it's just not good enough. It's still this 1% that's causing these outbreaks. That's just not true.
Yeah, and I think that's a big point is why is the current situation not good enough? Mm-hmm. If there's no increase in disease, and the number of fully unvaccinated people is 1%. I think it's 1.2%. I just saw. But if that's, again, why are they even messing with this? And again, I think it comes down to that 1% that are not vaccinating. That's hundreds of millions of dollars in lost income to the pharmaceutical industry. And I hate to always kind of go there, kind of get all conspiracy theory, but again, that might be partly what this comes down to is pharma is missing out literally on hundreds of millions of dollars every year, even from 1% opting out. And if that's what's driving this, then that kind of is extremely unfortunate because it's not increase in disease and it's not worsened outbreaks. So what is it? What's left? What else would be the driving force if it wasn't going to be a financial interest?
Compliance and money. It has to be connected. And then he goes on to talk about safety. Well, first he says there's a lot of misleading and incorrect information about vaccines that circulates online through social media. Isn't that funny? He happens to bring in social media. I guarantee you this guy doesn't know how to use social media. He looks a little bit on the older side. He's probably not using social media, but he is talking about the danger of misinformation. And this goes in direct alignment with what our podcast on censorship was that we did recently that you guys can check out. And he says that the vaccines meet the gold standard of safety according to the FDA. This is the gold standard. And so therefore, these are completely safe. And he says, something I think was kind of interesting is he says, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, the ACIP, makes vaccine schedules. Okay, he says they make the recommendation on the use of vaccines in our country and the annual child and adult vaccine schedules. I feel like that's a setup. He's starting to plant the seeds. We're also going to be talking about mandating adult vaccines. We know that they had the goal of 2020 healthy people. Child and adult schedules. And then he says internet fraud claims that vaccines are not safe and they're preying on the unfounded fears and struggles of parents and they're creating a public health hazard. He's talking about social media. He's talking about misinformation, quote, misinformation. We know that there are things that are being actively censored now.
Right.
He is talking about that in a hearing about whether or not we need mandatory vaccines on measles. I just think it's so weird to even be talking about social media and how that factors into this conversation because he's trying to make this acceptable that people's rights to freedom of speech are going to be taken away. Yeah. He's trying to make this, he's normalizing it.
Yeah, you're right. We're probably going to start seeing the idea of social media censorship showing up in every news article that has to do with vaccines.
It's going to be the next bullet point.
Yeah, it's going to be the next media soundbite. And it's not just a Congressman Schiff. It's it's now apparently a number of them, and
he's
that's
saying
scary.
It is, and he's saying that all this fraud, quote unquote fraud, whatever that is creating a public health hazard. It's the fraud on social media that are creating outbreaks. This is what he's saying, and therefore it's a public health emergency, a crisis, and we need to strip away constitutionally protected freedoms. And I hate how he's discussing safety as if it's unequivocal. It's just gold standard, totally fine, totally safe. He doesn't mention a single thing about vaccine safety. How different is this intro statement than what Congressman Posey talks about in his thing?
And I love how he says the FDA's gold standard of safety. Okay, how many Americans would actually have, I guess, enough faith in the FDA to say that their standards for drug safety is golden?
For things that have been approved and caused all these problems.
I mean, how many times have they come back to realize that medical devices, medications, and some vaccines that have caused some problems, that's a gold standard? I think a lot of Americans have a problem with that. But if the legislators are completely ignoring all the potential problems or conflicts of interest in what goes on at the FDA, that should tell Americans that there's some potential problems that are coming down the road that could affect us, that these legislators are completely oblivious to, which concerns me. And again, it concerns me that, again, anywhere do you see anyone discuss, yes, sometimes there are severe vaccine reactions.
Right, not even
mentioned. It's never acknowledged, even though there are thousands reported every year and probably tens of thousands not reported. Not once does any person in authority ever once acknowledge that.
But this just goes to show you how little they know about it, because you can't have this conversation and it be so one-dimensional. And Patty Murray was next, Senator Patty Murray, who I believe her focus is often on public health. So right away she says, I remember in 2001, which I got the year wrong, measles was officially eliminated from the United States. Okay, so again, she's talking about the elimination. They have the same bullet points they have to throw in here.
Yeah, and she says that was welcome news for families across the country. Nobody cared back then.
Nobody knew.
There was no celebration that measles was eliminated. Number one, it wasn't eliminated. We had 86 cases. Number two, no one was talking about it because no one had fear of measles. Measles was just always there in the background in small outbreaks, just like it is now.
And then, so here's what she says. Like other vaccines, we know the vaccine for measles is safe, effective, and saves lives. Again, bullet point, soundbite. Vaccines are safe. Vaccines are effective. Vaccines save lives.
Right.
These are all straight up sound bites. And then she says, that's why kids in college never had to worry about a measles outbreak at school. But we know that in highly vaccinated communities, there still have been cases of measles with high protection. So making it seem as if that we've all been completely free of this and it's all been fine until these darn social media people came to prey on everybody, and now we're having outbreaks.
But we're not having measles outbreaks in colleges.
Yeah.
We're not. And she actually says generation of students are starting college. They didn't have to worry about outbreak at school.
I think she was thinking mumps.
I know. It's very interesting because we are having mumps outbreaks in school, in colleges. And everyone has known and admitted, and everyone, scientists agree on this. The reason we're having mumps outbreaks is because the mumps vaccine wears off in almost everybody. There's no longevity to that vaccine. And that's why we're seeing mumps outbreaks. So I don't know if she was confused or if she's trying to pretend like we are having college outbreaks of measles when we're not.
Well, either way, that's misinformation,
it is.
Dr. Bob.
Oh, censored.
Needs to be censored.
Should cross it off. We should cut that part of our
Oh, yes. You guys aren't allowed to have all the story. Right. So then she talks, right away goes into herd immunity again, and she talks about the 95% and the threshold and the infants and the immunocompromised. She also mentions the national vaccination rate remains high and we're falling behind because of certain communities. And okay, so here's where I get a little irritated. She talks about, like in Clark County, this is where the outbreak happened, Washington, Clark County, Washington, where the public health officials continue to respond to the outbreak, the immunization rate among children in that community, and she makes it seem like it's the county, right, is less than 70%. Well, guess what? Guess who went and looked at the vaccination rates for the Washington Department of Health?
I did in my spare time. Yes,
you totally did while you were watching your two children. That's me.
And I told you all the data, so that you could present it.
Okay, so check this out. 70% is her number. Well, it turns out in Clark County, for the MMR vaccine, the kindergarten coverage is 85%. And for kindergarten through 12, which means the entire school-age population of Clark County, 94.7%.
Wait, so Senator Patty Murray, Democrat, was wrong?
She was wrong. This is a fact check, people. The K through 12 MMR coverage for Clark County, where the outbreak happened, is 95%, 94.7% for MMR. But what is she using? Probably one particular school or one particular thing for every single vaccine. And so she uses the low number to make it seem scary and dangerous. And this is why we need to mandate, because of one Russian community in Washington. Let's go ahead and push mandates for the entire nation. Children we have 330 million people, but the children for those parents and eventually for adults as well. So fact check, she's wrong. And she was talking about the outbreak, talking about most of it was children under 10 years old. Well, yeah, that's how natural immunity works. This is the age appropriate time to get measles. We talked about that in another episode. And then she says it's a terror for parents with newborns that can't get vaccinated because of this outbreak that's happening.
Right. And I guess we got to say, why is it a terror for newborns, for parents with newborns? It is because of our vaccination policy. We have completely eliminated natural immunity being passed from moms who've caught measles naturally, passing it to their newborns. So it's ironic that if we were to if we were trying to mandate vaccines for everybody in Clark County, that would create even more terror for all the newborns of the next generation, because none of them would have immunity. Whereas if you allow people to have natural immunity for measles, there is no terror for newborns.
It protects the babies under one, which are
pregnant moms, and the newborns are protected.
And this is the thing that they use is being the big danger zone, is look at all these babies unprotected. Yeah, mass vaccination campaign for this that is what has created our vaccine dependency, which creates the artificially induced vaccine protection. And that's just a very different thing. And that's why babies in outbreaks in the United States over the last 40 years, there are always usually about 10 to 15% of babies that are under 1. And babies under 1 are not protected because the mothers are no longer immune, because of their vaccine immunity has worn off and is insufficient to pass and give them protection. Right. So then this is the kicker right here. She says measles is not the only disease that deserves attention. We need to look at mumps. And isn't that funny? Because fully 98%, 99%, 100% vaccinated communities are where mumps outbreaks happen. You cannot get more compliance than that. You cannot physically get more compliance than that. Right. That is where the outbreaks happen. She mentions mumps, and then she mentions pertussis. So let's look at pertussis. We know, we've talked about this, typically around 90% of people in outbreaks for pertussis are previously vaccinated. So she's concerned about mumps and pertussis. She's concerned about measles, which in the Disneyland outbreak, half were vaccinated. All of the things she's mentioning have nothing to do with unvaccinated people. And I think it's so funny when I see somebody go, almost half were unvaccinated. You're like, that means more than half weren't. Like, isn't that concerning to you that more than half of an outbreak would be vaccinated? And in the case of pertussis, it's 90%. In the case of mumps, it could be almost 100% of all the cases are vaccinated. So she's highlighting those concerns, and then she goes into it right here.
Social media.
We need to understand the role social media and online misinformation play in spreading dangerous rumors and falsehoods. We need to better prepare the full spectrum of healthcare providers, who are often the professionals people trust most, to counter vaccine hesitancy and to promote vaccination. Now, I made a little photo today that I shared on my Facebook page that had 5 of the people who testified, including the 2 senators and 3 people on the panel. All 5, so 5 out of 7, mentioned social media.
Huh, okay.
An 18-year-old, a doctor that works in a hospital, the Washington State Secretary of Health, and the 2 senators putting this forward.
Oh, yeah.
They all talked about the dangers of misinformation on social media. I'm telling you, the odds of that many people bringing it up on their own, and they're written prepared, and they all read prepared speeches. The odds of them bringing that up are astronomically high. There is no way they just coincidentally all are low. Yeah. High, out of high numbers of people, yes,
Right.
astronomically low, that they would all bring this up. So do you know why this is coming up, guys? Can you guess by now?
Right. So it's not just mandatory vaccines, that this is also a planned, they're planning to make censorship even worse.
This is part of the PR campaign that is supported by pharmaceutical lobbyists. They are putting these bullet points into the speeches of the people that are testifying on the main stage because they know millions of people are going to be watching. They are normalizing social media and internet censorship, and they're making it part of the equation. So what they're telling you is there's a public health crisis, and if we don't censor this social media, then we are going to have serious problems and continue to have these dangerous outbreaks. We never heard a single thing about social media in 277, did we?
No.
That was just 4 years ago. We didn't hear one single legislator, one single person talk about the danger of social media and misinformation.
Right. And guess who actually has kind of their hands, around the main social media platform right now, Facebook. The U.S. government, basically, like we said this earlier podcast, but Facebook was facing millions of dollars in fines that they would have to pay to the government because of some security breaches and some personal information breaches. And now the government has decided they want to censor Facebook, and they want Facebook to start censoring vaccine misinformation. And it kind of makes me wonder if the government is going to basically forgive all those fines and excuse Facebook from all the fines they'd have to pay if Facebook is going to agree to this kind of censorship. I don't know if those two have anything to do with each other, but someone brought it up in an email group I'm part of, and I kind of wonder if Mark Zuckerberg and the groups of Facebook are going to cave. Well, we already know they are. They're already caving,
already
but is it going to get worse? As and the government is going to say, okay, Facebook, you don't have to pay us your hundreds of $millions in fines if you will agree to this kind of censorship. I don't know if that's connected, but
asking questions are important.
Yeah.
So good for you for bringing that to the table. And then she goes on to talk about the HPV vaccine and the flu vaccine. And again, these are primers. These are ways the conversations about measles. And yet we're throwing in things about social media censorship, and we're throwing in things about pertussis and mumps and HPV and flu. And she's talking about the fact that we educate people on these, and that's because there are so many bills that are out right now that are dealing with all these other vaccines. And she said we had one of the most deadly flu seasons in years. Well, turns out I also did a post on the flu yesterday.
Yes.
This amazing graph that was the Peter Doshi study from covering the flu from 1900 to 2004, so basically 100 years of influenza, showing the CDC estimated death totals and the actual death totals and how far apart they are. So we've talked about how that 80,000 is a gross exaggeration.
Right.
But to see it in a graph form and to see how some years it was 25 times higher. The estimate was 25 times higher. And in this case, last year could have been close to 35 times higher than what it was. But guess what? The legislators don't know that. And so she's telling you the flu vaccine is this coming on the heels of one of the most deadly flu seasons in years. And therefore, get ready, guys, for flu mandates that are coming.
And the reason why this is misinformation on the part of Senator Murray is that we did in an earlier post that, and you did this on your Facebook, that last year, half of the people who are hospitalized or who died from the flu in California were vaccinated. And then the other half who died or were hospitalized were unvaccinated. It was 50-50. It was equal. The exact same amount of people who died or were hospitalized in California from the flu last year were vaccinated. And if you go back 2 years, 70% of the people who were hospitalized or died of the flu in California were vaccinated. Yet Senator Murray here is saying that because we've had the most deadly flu season in years, people need to vaccinate. And then she talks about how the whooping cough vaccine is especially important for those around infants who are susceptible to whooping cough. she probably doesn't even know that the whooping cough doesn't stop you from catching the disease and spreading it.
The vaccine, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the vaccine, if you're a parent or a grandparent or a sibling and you get a whooping cough vaccine, it doesn't stop you from getting the disease and passing it on to babies. So your vaccination status has nothing to do with protecting a baby, yet she is stating something here that is misinformation, as if saying getting the vaccine does protect babies around you. It doesn't.
And I wrote that down for you to talk about, because what she's talking about is this idea of cocooning. And now this has become a new thing where it's starting to come up as, it's not just, you don't just need to get it when you're pregnant. You need to make sure that when that baby is born, everybody around you gets it. And then when that baby is 2 months, 4 months, and 6 months, they need to get it. They are really ramping up the pertussis vaccine, even though it does not have great efficacy and it wanes in as little as 2 to 3 years. So they're talking about cocooning, but can you just quickly expand on why cocooning, this concept of everybody getting vaccinated, why that does not, like a little more on why it does not actually protect the baby, because this is everywhere now.
Right. Yeah, the whole idea is you have a baby, everyone around that baby needs to get a flu shot and needs to get a whooping cough shot, because those are some of the biggest diseases that go around. Flu kills babies and whooping cough kills babies. So, because we can't vaccinate a young baby against whooping cough and we don't give young babies flu shots, we have to vaccinate everyone around them. It's called the cocooning effect. And this basically was a theory that came up about maybe 8 years ago, and they started promoting it. So now all OBs tell all their patients, don't you dare let anybody around that baby unless they've had a flu shot and a whooping cough shot. Well, guess what? Everybody knows that the flu vaccine does not stop you from catching the flu and passing it around to everyone around you. And the whooping cough shot, for sure, we know, does not stop you from catching whooping cough and passing it around to everybody around you. We know that for a fact. That's an indisputable fact. So there is actually absolutely no cocooning value from anybody getting a flu vaccine or a whooping cough vaccine. It does nothing for the baby. It might help you feel less sick. You're going to have less symptoms if you catch the disease, a whooping cough or the flu, but you're going to be just as contagious. In fact, because you have fewer symptoms, you're actually not going to recognize that you have the flu, or you're not going to recognize that you have whooping cough. You're going to be more likely to be around that baby because you feel less sick. So you might actually make a baby sick because you got vaccinated and you don't recognize you have whooping cough and you don't know you have the flu. So in fact, it could even be making things worse. And so, cocooning. And so when everyone discovered and figured out that the cocooning effect is no longer a valid theory, no one really talks about it anymore, except apparently legislators.
I'm seeing it a lot, though.
I don't think they're talking about it in the scientific or medical community anymore, because they now know it's bogus.
Yes.
Have you seen anyone retract it?
No, of course not.
Have you seen that the CDC said, oh, sorry, everyone, by the way, cocooning doesn't matter, so we can stop talking about it? Have you seen the obstetrical communities start telling their obstetricians, we were wrong, cocooning doesn't matter.
No.
Forget it. No, they're just kind of leaving it out there as something that
I
people
actually
can,
see it more,
believe.
which is terrible, because you're right, that's absolute misinformation. And what's interesting is in the Appendix E for CDC that talks about the vaccine preventable diseases, even though I know in 2014 California, or 2010 and 2014 California had outbreaks, according to the CDC, in 2014 with 32,000 cases, only 7 deaths from pertussis. Pertussis, which is very low, very low. Definitely not low enough to require everybody else to be getting vaccines, and definitely not not high enough to be mandating for, like in California, for people that work with children and that are in, work in daycares and things like that. And so she talks about the HPV vaccine. Why is that a big deal? Because right now there are currently 6 or 7 bills across the country that have to do with the HPV vaccine, giving without parental consent, and mandatory HPV vaccination for school entry. So the HPV vaccine, she's mentioning this not coincidentally. It's because this is coinciding with, again, it's a universal effort. It doesn't matter which state is putting out the bill. The goal for the pharmaceutical companies and their lobbyists is to get every single state to remove exemptions and to have that on a state level and a federal level. And that will just completely solidify their space here and their role and the program and everything.
Right.
So,
well, I think the main reason the the federal government is having these fake hearings, and the reason I call them fake is the federal government has no authority to impose mandatory vaccination laws on any state. So nothing can come from these hearings.
So what happens if they do pass it?
Well, if the federal government passed a mandatory vaccination law, the states don't have to follow it.
They don't have to adopt it.
They don't have to adopt it. So that's why I call this fake hearing. It's like a show to put on, in my opinion, it's a show to put on to help sell the idea of censorship, to make it palatable.
Yes.
Because that doesn't have to be a law. That can just be policies that Facebook and Amazon and Google adopt. But number two, it's basically to support the state laws.
Yes.
That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're encouraging the states to make these laws.
So now California, which we know is highly Democratic, that has always been a party line issue when it comes to the vaccine mandates. If California already has this law, if the federal law passes and California chooses to adopt it, it won't make anything different than what we have now because we already have that law.
Right.
So the only real risk then comes to the states who do not have removal of exemptions if their state decides to adopt the federal mandate.
Right.
And then, of course, if adults get involved, because then that's something separate.
Right.
And if a state chooses to adopt that. What's the process for that, though? For the state choosing to adopt the federal...
Need to get Kevin back on the line?
We need to talk about this because I've had a lot of people message me today, what if this passes? Oh my God, what will I do? And, for me, I'm thinking California, it's already like that. I mean...
Yeah, but I mean, there's no federal bill that's introduced for this. Right now, they're just putting on a show.
Well,
it's really just a show.
It's literally just a hearing to discuss the nature of vaccines, and again, like you're saying, to give ammunition to the states, and people feeling a little more comfortable with rights being taken away.
And to give ammunition because there's a federal resolution right now that their Congress is trying to pass that just basically says vaccines are awesome and they're safe and everyone needs to get them. It's basically a resolution. It has no legal power or authority. It just basically is Congress saying we love vaccines and everyone, we support them and we support mandates and they're completely safe for everybody. So maybe this is trying to support that resolution so that if any Congress people are against that resolution, they're now part of the misinformation.
Well, but
they're now on the outside.
That doesn't have to pass. You're saying it already just exists.
No, it's a resolution that it would have to pass if they're going to make it an official resolution.
But what does it do? What does it mean? It
doesn't do anything. It just goes on paper saying resolved. We as a Congress have decided vaccines are great and everyone should get them and they're perfectly safe for everybody.
So does this feel like it's laying the groundwork? Then we have a resolution first. We have a couple hearings.
I don't know. Yeah.
Then we have. I mean, is that kind of inch by inch type of thing?
I don't know.
Why would you have a resolution if it's pointless? Who needs to know that they think vaccines are great? Like, what does that do for anyone?
The media can use it. It's a tool for people to then pass real legislation.
That's to say that the nation supports this, so therefore you should too on a state level.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
But was there in 2015? Was there a federal bill that was actually introduced as a bill?
Yeah, there was a federal bill. It's very interesting. It's basically a bill that would deny Medicaid money to states who did not have mandatory vaccination laws. And it didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I remember
it died in committee because I don't they just didn't have enough support.
But no mandatory vaccine federal bills that were in that year.
Right, but because the federal government, knowing they couldn't mandate vaccines for states, they decided to do it in a different way. Let's deny you Medicaid money if you yourself don't pass a mandatory law.
As a punishment,
Right. Yeah, so
let's strong arm you.
Yeah, so it's getting ugly. It's not getting better, you guys. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. And that's why we're going to keep doing what we're doing, but we are going to keep finding new ways to do what we do. We're not just podcasting. We're going to keep writing. Books are coming out, and new ways to form groups of like-minded citizens to educate each other about vaccines, so that people can. If you're not going to be able to find information on the internet pretty soon, you're going to have to find information somewhere. If they're going to start burning books, like we've said, have in our censorship episode, it's going to start coming down to word of mouth, person to person, conversations about this. And I would say they're making this so ugly, it's got to backfire. This can't possibly work.
It can't sustain like
censorship and denying people the access to information. They're just going to look harder. They're going to find it. They're going to find the truth, and they're going to realize vaccines can't be mandatory in any reasonable society, and then it's going to backfire. And so, what I predict, I hope.
Yeah. So what we will cover. So again, there were 5 speakers that were chosen at this particular hearing, and we'll fact check those as well. Everybody kind of had a different angle. There was a professor on public health policy. There was the Secretary of Health for Washington. There was a doctor of in hospitals, which I say that because you always see those types of doctors speaking out in this type of situation. Doctors who don't have practices, who don't see patients on a regular basis, who don't follow up with patients. They see them for short, acute infections. They do not follow them through their vaccine cycles to see people have vaccine injuries and things. And they're usually the most vocal on stuff like this, I find. And then the other 2 were a man who started a foundation for immunocompromised people, and then also some high schoolers. So
right. Yeah. Well, why didn't they invite somebody who started a foundation for vaccine compromised children? Again, why. Everyone knows why.
But we'll fact check and go through those and just kind of see if they had small things to say. But a couple questions were asked. I will say one of the things that was asked by this older senator asked the high schooler, you mentioned online, is that where your mother gets all of her information from? And he says, yes, that's what she has presented to me so far, Facebook and other social media platforms. And then the congressman or whoever he was says to the 18-year-old, where do you get your information from? Is that where you get your information from? And he goes, not Facebook. I get it from CDC, the World Health Organization. And I had to laugh because all of the stuff that we look at is from the CDC and the World Health Organization. Right. You might share it on Facebook, but that's sourced information.
Right.
So I think it's so ironic that people bring up this, Google degree and this idea of online, but it was such an obvious, let's poke fun at even his own mother. Right. He was happy to join in that joke for his 15 minutes of fame, as people have said. And anyway, it's the social media being brought up in the question and answer part of this, I thought was interesting. And the fact that so many of these Congress people are old enough to where I don't think they're really using social media. So that they're bringing this up, and because this is being planted as to be part of the new part of the conversation. Social media censoring because of all this dangerous misinformation. Who decides what's misinformation? Who knows? Who decides if this is a public health threat? Who knows? It doesn't matter. You don't get to hear it all anyway. So what do you care? You're going to just get what they give you, and you're going to finish your plate. I mean, this is so dramatic, but it's true. Yeah. Anyway, we have a lot of great episodes still coming up. Yeah. We cannot keep up with the topics that we have.
I kind of feel like a few years from now, we're going to be broadcasting this on AM radio frequencies, from a bunker somewhere because they just shut it all down. I mean,
we're coming to you live. The signal's shoddy.
I mean, could you imagine? I mean, it almost feels like that.
Well, you know what? Whatever happens, I feel like we've done our part in trying to bring information to light that people deserve to hear. We've empowered people, we've supported people, we've encouraged people, we've informed people, we've encouraged them to become informed, and we've encouraged people to have this conversation. That's literally all you can do. If this was the end of it, let's just say, we've done a lot to do this, and that's all that we can do. And so we'll keep doing it as long as we can, as long as I still feel up to it, because I know you will for decades to come. But anyway, so many cool topics coming up, including a really great Japanese study that we're going to break down.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I mean, today we kind of did several topics that are all kind of current events, things that are going on right now. I think my bigger passion,
except for
meningococcal, right? But my bigger passion really is just sort of the everyday topics, just the basic topics, just the topics that are timeless that you could we could have been talking about last year or next year, and I think that's more of the heart of this podcast. So I think if you're not always going to see us just sort of like, harping
talking about bills
something that's
or new stuff.
right now. Because I feel like the whole vision of this podcast is, you could be listening to this 3 years from now, and it's going to be like totally new and interesting to you because it's about the vaccine conversation and not always politics. So we kind of had to take this little detour
politics
right
is
now.
part of it sometimes.
It's part of it,
and
but yeah, it's
people's rights are important.
I
know.
I don't like it,
but like this is what scares parents the most.
Yeah.
And this is the time that they need support the most.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately, I wish we could stay out of the legislative thing altogether.
Yeah.
But you sort of have to delve in a little bit to help clear up some of the misinformation that could be out there.
Yeah. Are you getting texts from Steve?
I know I've gotten like a whole bunch about
I'm getting texts from Cheryl.
Watching.
She's
Yes,
like, when
we
are you
are on
coming
our way.
home? Dinner's at 6:30. So
what are you having?
I don't know.
Oh, I have to go make a meal. See how that works? You've got man privilege.
I don't know what Cheryl's going to be waiting for me.
You mean you're just going to come home and there's going to be a meal?
Yeah,
oh my God.
amazing.
I don't know the last time that's happened for me.
Yeah, it's awesome.
But anyway, some good stuff coming up. It won't be long. We have you will not be without
Steve, make dinner tonight.
Except he's not home yet.
Okay.
He comes home late, unfortunately.
Serenity.
Yeah,
put on the mac and cheese and hot dogs.
Ew, gross. We don't eat hot dogs.
I remember going years ago. That was like the standby meal. It's like if we're just tired, we don't want to make anything.
I cannot stand hot dogs.
Mac and cheese and hot dogs.
No, you know what our go-to is? Our go-to is this grain-free pizza by Against the Grain, which is really good. So good. You get it at Whole Foods or Sprouts in the freezer section. That's my go-to. Like, didn't have time for dinner. Let's just do this. That's kind of our worst of the worst, and it's actually really good. But we had it yesterday and 2 days before that. So there'll be none of that. But stay tuned listening, you guys. We've got more to come. And you will not be without episodes in the coming weeks because we're going to hit you with a bunch of them. We'll be giving you 2 episodes a week, hopefully. And so...
And we pretty much always do 2 episodes a week. Occasionally it's only 1 just because, people get sick or things get busy. But now we have a whole bunch we can anyway.
So thanks again for listening. And
Yeah.
we will check in with you soon on the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and
Dr. Bob.
Thanks for listening. Bye, you guys.
We're gonna be the peace we wanna see in the world. Yeah, be the peace we wanna see in the world. Be the love we wanna see in the world. Be the joy we wanna see in the world. Be the change we wanna see in the world.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.